It's Monday, and that's what happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. The year is 1968, and Toho sent out the call to destroy all monsters. That's right, this week I'm going to talk about what was designed to be the end of the Godzilla timeline at Toho. Producer Tomoyuki Tanaka felt that the Godzilla series had basically run its course. Godzilla's origins was that of a monster that was going to destroy humans, but along the way he met up and fought other monsters, including King Kong, and he slowly started becoming something of an anti-hero. And finally, he became a father. There really wasn't much more they could do with the character, so the plan was to send Godzilla and all of his friends off with a big old celebration that was intended to bring every single Toho kaiju into one single film. Director Ishiro Honda had ideas too. He liked the idea of showing lunar colonies and genetically hybridized monsters and how the monsters could be fed since so many of them were around and such. Well, those ideas were a bit too high-minded for the budget and had to be dropped. But one thing Honda liked and was able to really kind of play with was the concept of a monster farm. And I'll explain that a little bit more as we get into the movie. But the lineup for this movie was as follows. Godzilla, Baragon, Anguirus, Gorosaurus, Minya, back for another go at it from the last film when he was introduced in Son of Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, at least in the form of a Mothra larva, Manda from the recently discussed Atragon, Varan, Kumonga the giant spider, and King Ghidorah. Now, originally, there were plans to bring in Maguma from Gorath, which was also recently discussed, and Ebra, the giant lobster monster, but those were replaced by Minya, Anguirus, and Gorosaurus right before filming began. And initially, Kamacuras was the giant praying mantis, and even the two Gargantuas from War of the Gargantuas, Sanda and Gyra, they were originally thought to be brought in, but that didn't quite work out. Now, Kamacuras did make a very brief cameo unintentionally. Reused film from Son of Godzilla shows Kumonga, and it was meant to place him on Monster Island, but the shot they used showed a captured and webbed up Kamacuras near the bottom of the frame. Now, I mentioned King Kong, and initially he was also slated to appear in an earlier version of this big finale, but Toho's rights fell away right before they could actually get production rolling. And I also mentioned how this was meant to be the canonical end of Godzilla on his timeline. Well, that's still kind of true, even though there were movies that would be released after this movie. You see, the movie is set near the end of the 20th century. The American dub of the film places the exact year at 1999, even though I think in the Japanese version it just says at the end of the 20th century or something like that. It's a little bit more vague. So while there were more movies after this, and one of them shows a character that is supposedly destroyed in this movie, it's fine because Destroy All Monsters was placed some 30 years out into the future, so they can do sci-fi stuff more easily and leave the door open for Godzilla to return if this turned out to be a hit. And spoilers, the movie must have been a hit because Godzilla returned like 1 year later with Minya in the notoriously silly All Monsters Attack. And then the 70s came, and oh boy, do the movies get weirder and much more fascinating at that point. Now, more interestingly, though, is what would have happened if either Toho stuck to their guns or this movie turned out to not be a success. It's not like the rest of the world would have had no idea or concept of what Godzilla was. The Toho kaiju films were exported all around the world with a fair amount of success. They were somewhat popular films. In fact, I think in Germany, a lot of them end up incorporating the Frankenstein legend into it somehow or something. It's a weird way how they were regionalized based on where they were being sent out to. But, they were somewhat popular, if not entirely taken seriously here in America. So I wonder if the Gamera series would have continued, or if Toho would have licensed off the Godzilla character for Americans or British filmmakers to do something with. Everything we have today with the American versions of the Toho creatures in the legendary films could have still happened, and maybe could have happened a little earlier, but I suspect that it wouldn't have happened at all. If Destroy All Monsters turned out to be the true end of Godzilla as a movie star, then I think we would have still gotten the movies here in America to play on local TV stations, but I don't think he would have been the mega star he is today. I think Big G's worldwide growing fame was due to Toho's commitment over the breadth of 15 Showa films, 7 Heisei films, and 6 Millennium films. And that's why he was able to remain so popular, and why he is as popular as he is today. Toho stuck with the guy, and the guy became beloved, and Toho decided that they kind of had to continue to make him the face of their company. But let's talk Destroy All Monsters and get into the futuristic world of 1999. So the United Nations Science Committee has been busy doing some awesome things at the end of the 90s. There's a functional base on the moon, and there's a rocket base on Earth. There are daily travel and trips back and forth to the moon. And there's also an underwater base to study underwater life. But you know what else they've done? They've rounded up all the monsters and moved them to an island and called their section of this island Monsterland. If the monsters attempt to leave Monsterland, there are various triggers that are designed for each monster to prevent them from leaving. Rodan is kept from flying away by way of a magnetic dome. Mothra is forced back by a smoky gas. Godzilla is met with boats or something that tell him, I don't know, that the water's too cold and he won't be able to swim or something. But deep inside the island, there's a base where scientists are able to study the monsters fairly up close. One of the people who flies back and forth from the moon is Captain Yamabe, and he calls his girlfriend Kyoko, who works in the science base inside of Monsterland. And while they talk, comms are mysteriously cut off. And the base on Monsterland then begins to fill up with a yellow gas, causing all the scientists to pass out. And we also see that the gas is beginning to spill all over the island, and it affects the monsters as well. So no one is able to communicate with Monsterland. And soon, once things kind of clear, they actually can see that there is some damage on Monsterland as well. But soon after that, Manda begins attacking London, Gorosaurus attacks Paris, Rodan attacks Moscow, Mothra shows up in Beijing, and Godzilla arrives to attack New York City. Curiously, though, Tokyo was not attacked despite it being very close to Monsterland. Captain Yamabe is recalled to UNSC base, and shortly after launching from the moon in his ship, the Moonlight SY-3, he and his crew spot something that looks suspiciously like a UFO. But the Moonlight is ordered to Monsterland and told to land inside the island, inside the base. When they get inside, they find that the scientists inside are all fine. In fact, they seem almost too fine. Monsterland's leading scientist, Dr. Otani, reveals that they didn't just let the monsters go, they are remote controlling them. Otani shows Yamabe that the monsters are in various places where they cause all sorts of death and destruction. Otani and Kyoko take the astronauts to meet the people who created the ability to control these monsters. There they meet the Queen of the Keloks. Now, the Keloks are mostly feminine or women aliens, and the Queen has taken control of not just the monsters, but also the scientists at that base. And when the Queen shows that she's protected by a force field that prevents Yamabe and his men from reaching her, they plan to take Otani and Kyoko off the island. And that's when the Queen tries flooding the room with the gas to knock out Yamabe's men. But they are quick and get gas masks and flee Monster Island after a brief firefight with the other mind-controlled scientists. Even though Kyoko is basically shown running away and not able to be captured, they are able to capture Otani, and they take him back for questioning. After an investigation, the base is emptied, and when Otani refuses to give any more answers to his questions, he decides to instead jump out of a window to his death. Kyoko and a couple of other agents of the Keylocks capture Yamabe and his supervisor, Dr. Yoshida, but the special police come to rescue them, and it's soon discovered that one of the Keylock agents has something implanted into his neck just behind his left ear. It's a tiny silver ball that acts as some sort of a transmitter. Using the frequency, Yamabe, Yoshida, and the rest of the UNSC tracked down the various devices hidden in what look like rocks all over the globe. It's figured that these are passing along the frequencies that are controlling the monsters. So the warning goes out to people about the people from Monster Island that are now under the control of the Keylocks, but also the monsters are still on the loose and attacking cities. And that's when Godzilla and Rodan arrive in Tokyo to begin wrecking the place. And soon they're joined by Manda. And after the self-defense force start engaging with the three monsters who arrived first, more trouble comes in the form of Mothra. By the day's end, Tokyo is not much more than a pile of rubble. And after the attack, Kyoko arrives to deliver a message from the Keylocks. Basically, it's as simple as this. Let the Keylocks stay on Earth and let them rule the planet with their laws, and the monsters go back to Monsterland. If not, the monsters will destroy everything and everyone. Yamabe frees Kyoko from the Keylock control by spotting that her earrings are where her control transmitter is located, and literally rips them out of her ears. However, freed from their control, her memory is basically wiped out about where the secret Keylock base is located. So the search for the base starts in a part of Japan that seems to have had things done to it very similar to what happened in the initial attack on Monsterland. When forces attempt to invade the area, they find that Godzilla and Anguirus are both defending it. And when the Moonlight SY-3 chases after a flying saucer, Rodan chases after them. And that indicates to them they must be in the right area. However, it's all a ruse, and the actual base that is transmitting the control signal for the monsters is actually inside the moon. So the Moonlight SY-3 crew goes into action to battle against the aliens, and it's determined that the Keylocks must be a race from a very warm climate, because when Yamabe's crew basically burrowed through the wall of the Keylocks base under the moon's surface, it caused the temperature to drop, and basically it kind of seems like they killed the Keylocks, but it really kind of basically renders them inert, and they kind of turn into what their actual appearance is, which are fairly large metallic glittery rocks. The only thing still operating in the Keylock base is the transmitter that is being used to control the monsters. Yamabe and crew cut the device out of the console to bring it back to Earth. Now, upon their return to Earth, the monsters are all freed from the Keylock control and now are basically able to be controlled by the humans. Knowing the remaining Keylocks on Earth are holed up in Mount Fuji, the humans point basically the monsters, all of the monsters, toward Fuji to attack. First is Minya, followed by Godzilla himself, then Mothra, then Manda, Anguirus, Baragon, Gorosaurus, Kumonga, Varan, and Rodan all follow. It's like the humans said, well, if you turn our monsters against us, we're going to send them back at you all at once. But the Keylocks don't personally fight their own defense, though. Instead, they call in King Ghidorah as a ringer. The Queen of the Keylocks think that the Earth monsters collectively do not stand a chance against the space monster. The battle begins, and it's all the Earth monsters against King Ghidorah. Godzilla, Anguirus, and Gorosaurus bum rush King Ghidorah. Mothra and Kumonga shoot silken webbing at him. Rodan tries kicking up a wind with his wings. Anguirus tries to bite into one of the necks of the Golden Dragon, but King Ghidorah takes to flight to basically drop Anguirus on his back, and then King Ghidorah then lands on top of Anguirus and squishes him into the ground to knock him out. Godzilla and Gorosaurus don't care much for that. So they try to go into the fray to bite and scrape and scratch and punch King Ghidorah. Godzilla grabs a couple of necks, Anguirus grabs the third, and then Gorosaurus does his kind of kangaroo-style kick into King Ghidorah's back to knock him down. It's pretty vicious. In fact, surprisingly, the best hits are put on by Godzilla and Gorosaurus, not Rodan, not Mothra, not Anguirus, not the ones that we know best. It's Godzilla and Gorosaurus. Minya uses his smoke rings that he blows out to choke one of King Ghidorah's necks. One by one, the good monsters seemingly each kill a head of Ghidorah. And once he's down, Mothra and Kumonga cover the defeated King Ghidorah with webbing, and soon a fire monster is shown flying down and attacking Rodan and the other monsters. It then attacks the Monsterland base and destroys it. And basically that destroys the machine controlling the monsters for the good guys. But you see, Godzilla is good and pissed off at the Keylok, so realizing that they're the real villain, not people and not the other monsters, he basically attacks the underground base of the Keyloks. Meanwhile, the Moonlight SY-3 chases after the fire monster, while Godzilla destroys the Keylok base. Which once he destroys the base, it renders them inert by forcing that colder air in, because they're more used to a warm climate, and that's why they revert back to that rock-like creature. But the fire monster is revealed just to be a flaming Keylok ship, and when it's destroyed, the Keyloks are done for. The monsters of Earth return to Monsterland to live once again in peace alongside each other and humans. So let's get to the 3 things I like about Destroy All Monsters. First, it's kind of an interesting intended finale. Sure, we get lots of monster action, especially in the final 20 minutes or so, which I will definitely be going back to here in a moment. Yet, this is a movie that possesses all the stuff we came to really like about 1960s Godzilla and Toho. It's got the heavy sci-fi bent with the threat from beyond the stars. It's split about 2/3 human stuff and 1/3 monster stuff, give or take, which is the typical split for a Toho film. But somewhere along the way, between this Godzilla film and the Gamera series, we often saw pretty lady alien bad guys. That all checks those typical boxes for these types of movies. So one of the things I like about this movie is that it plays like a greatest hits record for the Toho rock stars. There's little new or original here, except there are far more monsters than usual. It's always listed as a Godzilla film, but to be fair, I don't know if he truly has a significant advantage in terms of screen time compared to the others. He's just the star. If you look at the Avengers movies, Robert Downey Jr. was the star of those movies as Iron Man, even if he wasn't on screen as much as Captain America or whoever else. It does work as a good tip of the cap to the series, and if this was how it was going to end, then they did it right by making sure they played to what worked before. Second, about the only time it really did feel like a finale, like a really earnest finale, was in the closing moments of the movie. There's almost a sadness to the final moments. The music starts, slowing down and being more somber. Hamabe and Kyoko are flying overhead in the chopper to look in on the residents of Monsterland. At that time, it might have felt like a goodbye to the characters. Each character gets kind of a final bow to the audience, and we even get a few new residents like Baragon, Kumonga, and Varen. It's kind of like they're all waving goodbye to the fans. And this is especially true in the case of the final 2 that we see, Minya and Godzilla. It's like we're being told that, their wars are over and they plan to live out the rest of who knows how long, finally happy and somewhere they feel safe and can cohabitate with the rest of the ecosystem and each other. It's a good way to end the movie if it was decided that it was time to call it quits after this one. In a sort of a way, it kind of tugs at the old heartstrings, But thirdly, before we get to that final battle, we get a hell of a final 20 minutes of the movie. The final battle with King Ghidorah was pretty dang worth all the first 60 plus minutes. The final fight even opens with a news crew practically commentating like it's a heavyweight wrestling match. It's the perfect monster fight. King Ghidorah is never an easy foe. In previous outings, both Godzilla and Rodan took on the three-headed monster and barely won. And in this movie, it takes a few more monsters, and King Ghidorah is still a tough out. But once our monster buddies start kind of getting the upper hand, it's a thrashing, and it is fantastic. The surprise MVP of this battle turns out to be Gorosaurus. He maybe didn't fare so great against King Kong and King Kong Escapes, but he probably delivered the blow that put King Ghidorah in pretty dire straits in this movie by way of that devastating kick to the back while Anguirus and Godzilla was holding on to his heads. It's a fight that's well worth the wait. It's well worth the price of admission. It's even a perfect highlight to watch on its own. It's maybe, and I think maybe recency's sake, since I just watched this movie again, it's probably the best of all the fights in the Godzilla movies out there, but I don't know. I mean, it's pretty darn good. If it's not number one, it's going to be pretty close to the top, I think, in most people's list. And that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast on Wednesday mornings and Monster Mondays on Monday afternoons at your favorite podcast providers, as well as going to YouTube, where we also upload the episodes there. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. And hey, speaking of Godzilla, Big G's having his 70th birthday this year. So to celebrate, let's do a completely different thing at Monster Mondays. Instead of talking about a single film, let's celebrate the big guy's birthday with the recording of a live PopCon Indie event that I hosted back in April called For the Love of Godzilla, where I discussed the franchise as a whole in celebration of his 70th birthday. So, until next week, stay spooky.